welcome to the conversation on the boundaries of pluralism and synagogue life. And we're going to be discussing issues that arise in merged and merging congregations as a template for understanding pluralism in the American Jewish community. We have two speakers to share their experiences with us. The first is Linda Rich, who is a field consultant for the Alban Institute, a specialist in coaching leadership, organizational development, and management consulting. And she has worked with synagogues, nonprofit organizations, large corporations, and small businesses. Linda has provided lay leadership in a variety of settings, including a cross-denominational study on the role of the rabbi, which resulted in the popular guide, The Rabbi-Congregation Relationship, A Vision for the 21st Century. You can read the rest of her bio in your packet, but we're very lucky to have her expertise. She has worked with many congregations on these issues. We're also very fortunate to have with us Rabbi Steve Kushner, who has served as the spiritual leader of Temple Ner Tamid in Montclair, New Jersey, since its inception in 1980. And in that time, he has been instrumental in developing adult education, interfaith, social action, outreach, family programming, and even a klezmer band as integral elements of the synagogue. Rabbi Kushner, you can read the rest of Rabbi Kushner's bio in the packet, but he has been instrumental in presiding over the successful merger of two communities, and he's going to be sharing with us that experience. I'm going to hand the mic over in a moment to Linda Rich to begin to talk about the kinds of pluralism issues that arise when communities merge. And I want to invite us to listen with an ear not only to the interesting situations that can arise when communities with two different practices and perhaps sometimes with two different value systems, or more than two, begin to come together, but also for the process of how do we go about talking about those conflicts? How do we go about noticing where the edges are and where we might look for compromises, solutions, or other ways of dealing with multiple practices? And how do we understand that process as a positive and important part of bringing communities that have been separate together? So please be listening with those thoughts in mind, and after our speakers present for a little bit, we will open up for some discussion. So Linda, thank you.
So I want to start with a quote to read you a paragraph about what happened in the 1920s. In Philadelphia, after World War I, a group from Beth Israel congregation, where men and women worshiped together while an organ played, joined a group from Ohel Jacob congregation, where men and women were rigorously separated and no instrumental music accompanied the worship, to create Beth Shalom, an emerging conservative congregation. Rabbi Mortimer J. Cohen would later describe the 1920s as Beth Shalom battles: the battle of the location, the battle of the spittoons, the battle of the mixed seating, the battle of the mixed choir and organ, the battle of language of the service, all Hebrew or mixed Hebrew and English. That was in the 1920s. So this isn't as new as we sometimes think it is. The issues, obviously, that we're discussing today are somewhat different. We're not talking about whether to have spittoons or not. That was a very big issue back then. But today we are talking about which prayer book to use, how egalitarian the practice should be, who counts as a Jew, and very importantly, we're often talking about the memorial plaques, where we should hang them, where the ones from the other synagogue go, and things like some very practical issues that are not actually, religious. There's another level, though. There's a third level underneath that, and that's the level of narrative or stories, or actually the identity. It's how we construct meaning. It's what we tell ourselves and about others and about how the world works, how we internalize and integrate our experience to define who it is and who we are and who we want to be. And that's what we can change. That's what we reinvent every day as we go along in life. We write our own identities, we write our own stories. And some of the stories have to do also, something was not discussed this morning, was what is our purpose in even sitting here? What's the story we tell each other about what religion is about what God means? Those kinds of stories, which I happen to think are interesting and fascinating and wonderful to have conversations about. In terms of merging and deciding how we are going to practice together and be together and live together, I think the place that's worth working with are those values, that middle place, the values and the common understanding of where do we share. And then the place to go from there is to say, okay, how can we practice together, if at all? And what are the stories underlying it that we tell ourselves and about each other that can be very interesting to each other? And do we want to continue to rewrite the stories that we're telling? So in terms of doing all that assessment and working with one or more other partners that we're looking at merging with, we want to be talking at that level of values. And we also want to identify anytime if there are deal breakers that are very, very important to us in terms of our practices in which we manifest our values. So for example, I worked with two congregations. One was Reform and one was Conservative. They are working towards a merger. Right now they're cohabiting. One is renting space from the other, but they're working towards a kind of merger. It's actually a multi-level merger. It's rather interesting. They will still have two congregations under a merged organization. And they each came to the table concerned about what the other would want to do, how the other would want to practice differently. The Conservative congregation had one deal breaker that they insisted on, which was the building must be kosher to our standards. The Reform congregation had one deal breaker. It's a very musical congregation. And they said, we must be allowed to have instrumental music, recorded music, any kind of music we want at our service. And they each said, okay, we will live to your primary concern, and they're moving ahead from there. They did decide, by the way, interestingly enough, that they needed time, that they weren't ready yet to go and merge. And that is one of the things that we find and that we suggest to people is to avoid premature closure. Don't finalize things before you're ready to finalize them. And lastly, you want to envision the new thing. And I am going to be very excited about working with Steve and merging our congregations and talking about how we can envision living our shared core values, because we discovered we have a lot of core values in common, and we're going to live them in fresh and exciting ways. We're talking about possibilities and the future, and we're using the language of possibility.